Hi everyone, this is Chen from IBM Research. Welcome to the AAAI 2024 presentation on model reprogramming, resource-efficient cross-domain machine learning. So I would like to provide some motivation, right? So the goal here is really to unleash the power of pre-trained models to do cross-domain machine learning tasks. It's like what the Sir Isaac Newton had once said, if I've seen further, it is by standing on the shoulder of giants. And in this case, right, the giants are actually the available and abundant pre-trained models in very different domains. For example, in certain domains such as text, image, and speech, we do have powerful large pre-trained machine learning models, right, like foundation models, for example. And model reprogramming is really interested in leveraging these pre-trained models in certain well-studied domains to solve tasks in resource-limited domains. And by resource limitation, we mean examples like limited data, where the number of training data are very limited, not insufficient to train a pre-trained model. Also, it could be limited in terms of the model itself, right? For example, in certain domains, there are simply no good high-quality model exist, and also limited in training resource, right? For example, training from scratch can be too costly and expensive. Or limited the training constraints, for example, privacy budgets, training time, and so on. So model reprogramming is basically a new alternative to enable transfer learning, but without fine-tuning the model. So this is the framework of the model reprogramming, right? So we take a pre-trained model and freeze it, right? Basically meaning no fine-tuning, right? When we adapting that pre-trained model to solve a different task. Instead, we inserted two new layers, right? The input transformation layer and an output mapping layer to a pre-trained model to adapt the pre-trained model, right, from one source domain, right, to solve machine learning tasks in the target domain. And we will show some specific examples in follow-up slides. So there's a lot of the benefits of using this model reprogramming framework. Right? For example, it's very data and parameter efficient, right? In terms of the data scale, it requires very limited amount of training data to achieve good performance. In terms of parameter efficiency, right, it is much more efficient to train compared to other machine learning pipelines, right? Because we only need to train those inserted layers, right? And comparing to training foundation models, doing task-specific training and or transfer learning, right, it can be much more parameter efficient. So how can we use pre-trained model or more generally foundation models in resource-limited settings, right? So in standard settings, right, we require pre-training and then fine-tuning, right? But the caveat is that we need to ensure there's a sufficient pre-trained data, right, and also compute power, and then we can take the pre-trained model to fine-tune to an in-domain downstream task where the source and target domains share some similarity. However, by model reprogramming, right, is best used in the resource-limited setting where we want to reprogram the model without tuning or adjusting the weights, right, to make it very resource efficient. And it's best to be used in new domains with limited data or compute power, and even in a practical and challenging case where there's no good pre-trained models available in that target domain. So since we mentioned transfer learning, I just want to quickly highlight the differences. So by transfer learning, we mean that take a pre-trained model and fine-tune a subset of parameters to adapt to the downstream task. In contrast, model reprogramming, right, can enable this cross-domain learning by reprogramming a pre-trained model from domain A to solve tasks in a very different domain, domain B. It features data and compute efficiency because we don't require fine-tuning the pre-trained model weights, and it can still achieve a very powerful performance for the same downstream task. So let me quickly provide a background of where these reprogramming ideas was first being originated. Right? So it was actually motivated from its AI security perspective, right? Where this adversarial reprogramming paper basically says we can secretly reprogram or repurpose a pre-trained model or API to do a different task without the consent of the model developer. For example, right, we can reprogram image classifier, right, like ImageNet classifier to do counting tasks, to do MNIST classification, to do CIFAR-10 classification with mediocre accuracy, which is not the intention of the original model developer. So we take this idea and expand it further, and we ask the question, right? How can we do with pre-trained models with reprogramming, and can we reprogram a black box, a powerful model, right, like ChatGPT, to do new tasks? So let me show you an example of a black box adversarial reprogramming, which basically can do transfer learning with a black box system. And by black box system, we mean a user can upload an image, right, for example, to the black box system and observe the output, right, but the user will never know what is inside the black box, and it can only have limited information, such as the model predictions, right, when doing reprogramming. So let me show you an example of how reprogramming works in this case of black box settings. So first, we start with a pre-trained model, right? For example, ImageNet classifier, right? So you give the image, you will give the class predictions of the ImageNet class outputs. Now we take a target domain data, we want to reprogram that model to solve a target domain task, like some biomedical image classification task. And there are a few steps that we need to follow in order to reprogram that model to do a new task. The first step is input transformation. So we basically put the target image at the center of the image of the inputs, and then we leave some extra space in the frame surrounding the target image as some trainable universal parameters to be reprogrammed as the inputs. And then we send this reprogrammed inputs to the black box model and observe the predictions of the source labels, right, like ImageNet class labels. Then the second thing we need to do is called the output label mapping. We need to map the source labels to the target label. For example, mapping a subset of the predictions on ImageNet classes to autism spectrum disorder class or non-autism spectrum disorder class. The final step, right, is after this connecting the inserting the input transformation and output mapping layers. The final step we need to do is to train these parameters associated with these layers with the task-specific laws, right? And in terms of the training, right, it can either be done in the white box setting if the target model is a white box model, or if we can use some black box optimization techniques like zeros order optimization or reinforcement learning to do the job if it's a black box model. So for example, right, this input transformation can be realized as a universal trainable perturbation to every target domain inputs. And interestingly, right, in the whole process, it is called model reprogramming because we do not require fine-tuning the pre-trained model. The pre-trained model weights are always fixed, keeps the same and kept fixed during the reprogramming process. So we can further generalize this to a general framework, right, where we just insert input transformation, output mapping layers, and we specify what the task-specific laws we want to optimize, what parameters are associated with these two inserted layers, and then we optimize the task-specific laws on those with these two layers, right, with the representations and the predictions provided by the pre-trained model, which is inserted in the middle of these two new layers. So let me quickly show you 3 examples of model reprogram. The first one is to reprogram a general purpose image classifier to domain-specific image classification, like ASD classification. In this case, we have a very limited amount of brain image data based on the brain correlation analysis, which contains 500 training samples for each class. So we reprogrammed the 2 different image classifiers, ResNet 15 and Inception V3. So what we have found that white box reprogramming actually performs pretty well. It has like close to 73% accuracy on this task. And black box reprogramming, which only uses gradient estimation instead of the true gradients, right, can still achieve very high accuracy. And the difference is because it's actually using approximate gradient instead of the true gradient. On the other hand, right, they actually both perform much better comparing to training from scratch and also transfer learning, right? Because this is a very challenging data set. And comparing to state-of-the-art that use a lot of complicated feature engineering, right? Reprogramming actually outperforms state-of-the-art accuracy reported in this data set. So since reprogramming can allow black box reprogramming and transfer learning, right? So we tried upload a traffic sign classification task on Microsoft Custom Vision API. and reprogram it to do ASD classification, right? So what we found is that by paying about like $20, right, so we can get a decent, accurate classifier on this task without even knowing what is being trained and provided by the API. The second example is reprogramming a human voice model to time series classification. So we take a human acoustic model classifier, which take a speech at the input and generates a voice command prediction at the output. And then we are going to repurpose this model to do time series classification, like ECG classification, industrial sensor classification, and so on. So similarly, right, we need to define the input transformation layer, right, by putting the actual input at the center of the source model's input, and then we allow some extra space for trainable parameter. And then we also do the label mapping at the outputs. So this is the actual implementation of how we inserted those two layers into pre-trained acoustic model. And by simply doing so, right, on a large data set called UCR time series data set, model reprogramming actually outperforms 19 out of 30 machine learning tasks. The third example I want to show is to reprogram language model to do molecule learning. So for example, right, we basically we can represent molecules as a sequence of chemical symbols as just like a different language. Then we can reprogram pre-trained language models, a human spoken language model like English, foundation model or language models to do molecule learning tasks. By doing so, right, we don't need a lot of in-domain molecule or protein data to do the job. We can simply take a pre-trained English model and then adapt it to solve molecule learning tasks with high data efficiency. So we have a paper that basically shows we can reprogram English language model to do protein learning tasks by doing dictionary learning. Basically, we need to figure out how do we map the token embeddings of the English tokens to the molecule tokens, amino acid tokens in this case, by basically representing amino acid tokens representation as a sparse linear combination of the embedding tokens from English domains. And by doing so, we can use the same model reprogramming ideas to do protein learning with high efficiency. We can also reprogram a generative model to infill protein tasks. In this case, right, we are basically inserting again the input transformation and output layers, right, to reprogram a BERT model to enable to do antibody sequence infilling tasks, right? One of the generative models for protein sequence design with very high data efficiency and diversity. So in a follow-up paper, right, we also summarize how model reprogramming and why model reprogramming works. So basically, there's a theory that informally stated as follows, right? The target risk, right, the success, the loss of the target domain task is basically bounded by two terms, right? The source risk, which means how good the source model is, plus the representation alignment loss, basically how well you can align the representations of the target domain using input transformation to the source data representation, right? So if they are very aligned, then we can basically reuse the machine learning rules learned from the source domain to solve the target domain task by realigning the target domain representations to be something recognizable by the source model. As an example, right, so we can observe the accuracy and also the representation alignment, the distance between the reprogrammed target data versus the source data in the representation space over training epochs. So what we can see is that as the training epochs evolves, the accuracy of the target task, right, it gradually increases, while the distance between the reprogrammed target representation and the source representation actually gets closer, which means they are more aligned, and therefore the target risks are being minimized properly. And on the right, we are showing you a visualization of these representations, right? So on the left is before reprogramming, the raw data are hardly separable in the source domain representation. And if you use transfer learning, which is the middle column, you see some separation, but still not perfect. While on the right, if you do reprogramming, now the target domain data sets can be well separated, and therefore we get good accuracy when we're doing classification on the reprogrammed representations. So to wrap up, right, this paper basically provides a survey and principled generic algorithms to describe model reprogramming, as well as covering why it works and what are the new challenges, opportunities associated with model reprogramming, especially in the era of foundation models. So it's basically a new and very exciting paradigm for data-limited cross-domain transfer learning with large pre-trained models. And we showed 3 use cases, right, very successful stories about reprogramming pre-trained models in different domains to solve new and challenging problems in a very different domain. And we also provided some theoretical justifications through this representation alignment perspective on how it works. So if you are interested in learning more, feel free to read the paper and reach out to me. Thank you.